It's June 11th, 1962, 11 p.m. You're lying on a cot in a 6 by 9-foot cell on the most secure island in America, 3 miles of freezing Pacific water between you and the mainland. Guards walking the corridor every 30 minutes, a watchtower with a sight line over every inch of the yard. And tonight, you're leaving. Not tomorrow, not someday, tonight. The dummy head you spent 3 months making from soap, concrete dust, toilet paper, and human hair is resting on your pillow. In the dark, through steel bars, looks exactly like a sleeping man. You've tested it. The guards walk past without stopping. You reach behind the back wall of your cell. 3 months ago, you started digging with a spoon. Tonight, the hole is big enough. Frank Morris had an IQ of 133, the same level as most neurosurgeons. He had been incarcerated since he was 13 years old and had escaped from every facility that had ever held him. He wasn't in Alcatraz because he was dangerous. He was in Alcatraz because he kept leaving places he wasn't supposed to leave. John and Clarence Anglin were brothers from a family of 13 children. They had robbed banks together, been caught together, and been transferred to Alcatraz together after escaping from 2 other federal prisons. The guards considered them charming. Cooperative, no trouble at all. Nobody considered what cooperative and no trouble at all looks like when it's being performed by 2 men who are quietly building a raft in the ceiling. For most people, Alcatraz is a movie. It's Sean Connery and Nicolas Cage. It's a tourist attraction in San Francisco Bay you can see from Fisherman's Wharf. It's the prison the government called inescapable, a piece of American mythology so polished that it barely feels real anymore. But strip away the mythology, and here's what Alcatraz actually was. A 22-acre island in one of the most hydrodynamically complex stretches of water on the Pacific coast. The currents around Alcatraz don't just run fast. They run in multiple directions simultaneously. The surface current pulls toward the Golden Gate and the open ocean. Underneath it, a countercurrent runs the other direction. Water temperature sits between 50 and 54 degrees Fahrenheit year-round. At that temperature, an untrained swimmer loses effective muscle control within 30 minutes. Hypothermia sets in within an hour. The FBI didn't call it inescapable because of the guards. They called it inescapable because the water did the job for them. Between 1934 and 1963, 36 men attempted to escape. 23 were caught. 6 were shot, 2 drowned. 5 were listed as missing, presumed dead. Presumed. The plan Morris and the Anglin brothers built was not impulsive. It was an engineering project that ran for over a year inside one of the most surveilled buildings in America. It started with the walls. Alcatraz was built in 1934, using a specific concrete mixture that, by the early 1960s, had begun to deteriorate from decades of salt air and moisture. The cells at the back of B and C block had a utility corridor running behind them, a narrow maintenance passage barely wide enough for a man to stand sideways. The ventilation grills covering the access points had been installed directly into the degraded concrete. Morris tested one with his fingernail. It moved. He recruited the Anglin brothers, then a 4th inmate, Alan West, who would ultimately fail to widen his own hole in time and miss the escape entirely. The 4 of them began digging with spoons stolen from the cafeteria, later upgrading to a crude drill fashioned from a stolen motor and a metal rod. They worked during the hour each evening when music was played over the prison intercom, Music Hour, which covered the sound of scraping and drilling. They worked in inches. They made the dummy heads from a mixture of soap, cement, toilet paper, and real hair collected from the prison barbershop floor. An inmate named Alan West later told investigators the heads were designed to be viewed from a distance of at least 6 feet through steel bars in low light. That was the only standard they needed to meet, and they met it. Above the cells, accessible through the utility corridor, was a rarely inspected area the inmates called the top of the block, a space between the cell tops and the roof of the building. For months, they stored everything up there. Raincoats collected and stitched into a raft. Rubber cement used as waterproofing, wooden paddles. An improvised life preserver made from more than 50 raincoats. A contact cement tube stolen from the workshop, used to seal every seam. On the night of June 11, 1962, at approximately 9:30 p.m., after lights out, Frank Morris, John Anglin, and Clarence Anglin placed their dummy heads in their bunks, climbed through the holes in the back of their cells, moved through the utility corridor, scaled to the top of the block, and exited through a ventilation shaft onto the roof of the building. They climbed down a kitchen smokestack, crossed the yard, scaled two security fences, reached the water's edge on the northeast corner of the island, and then they were gone. At 7:15 the next morning, a guard conducting cell checks grabbed the dummy head in Frank Morris's bunk to wake him up. The head came off in his hand. What followed was the largest manhunt the FBI had run in years. Coast Guard cutters swept the bay. Helicopters flew the coastline. Every ferry, every boat, every marina within 50 miles was searched. They found a homemade paddle near Angel Island, fragments of a raincoat raft washed up on the Marin County shoreline, a plastic bag containing family photographs belonging to the Anglin brothers wrapped in rubber to keep them dry surfaced near the Golden Gate. A makeshift life preserver was found floating in the bay. No bodies, no men. The FBI officially investigated the case for 17 years before transferring it to the U.S. Marshal Service in 1979, who continue to carry it as an active case today. The official position remains unchanged. The three men most likely drowned. Their bodies carried out through the Golden Gate by the current and lost to the Pacific. Most likely. Here is what most likely has to compete with. In 2013, a letter arrived at the San Francisco Police Department, written in unsteady handwriting. The author claimed to be John Anglin, 83 years old, living somewhere in the South. He said he had cancer. He said Clarence had died in 2008. He said Frank Morris had died in 1982. He offered to turn himself in and serve 1 year in prison in exchange for medical treatment. The FBI analyzed the letter. They could neither confirm nor deny it was genuine. They never located the sender. In 2015, a team of researchers from Delft University in the Netherlands ran a hydrodynamic simulation of the bay on the night of June 11, 1962. They modeled the specific tidal conditions, the current patterns, the water temperature, and the likely launch point on the northeast corner of the island. Their conclusion, if the men launched before midnight and paddled north, there was a viable corridor through the currents. A narrow window, difficult, not impossible. A Norwegian documentary team conducted their own investigation and produced evidence that two men matching the descriptions of John and Clarence Anglin had been photographed in Brazil in 1975. Former inmates, people who had known the brothers for years, looked at the photograph and said, yes, that's them. The FBI looked at the photograph too. They said they could not confirm it. What remains is this. 3 men built an escape from the inescapable. They did it with spoons, stolen raincoats, and human hair. They did it inside one of the most surveilled buildings in America under the noses of guards who thought they were sleeping, while music played over the intercom to cover the sound of their exit being constructed inch by inch in the wall behind their beds. Whether they drowned in the bay or walked out of the water somewhere on the Marin County coastline and disappeared into the country they'd been locked away from, nobody knows. And that absence of certainty is the thing that has kept this case alive for more than 60 years. Alcatraz was supposed to be the answer to the question of whether a prison could be made inescapable. The island, the water, the cold, the currents, all of it engineered to make the math impossible. And for 29 years, the math held. 3 men with IQs, patience, and spoons changed the answer. The prison closed 8 months after they left.